Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
God, my mom called and she said, I've been thinking about this. If you don't have a wedding, we can just get money.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Advocacy Manager Reagan Stone. Today's conversation is part of a series we started with Democratic lawmakers in advance of the 2025 legislature, and we're continuing as we head into the third month of our state's biennial session, of course, highlighting legislative priorities and what's at stake for our state. State Representative Terry Meza believes that real Texas leadership means building bridges, not walls. Representative Meza was elected to the House in 2018, and prior to her time in the Texas Ledge, she worked as a teacher at South Grand Prairie High School and operated as an independent legal practice. Welcome to the show, Representative Terry Meza.
Well, thank you.
I want to just get to know a little bit about you. Can you tell me about yourself, introduce yourself to our audience, and of course, tell us how you got to the Pink Dome.
Well, I am a native of Irving. I was actually born in Oak Cliff, but that was only because there were no hospitals in Irving at the time that I was born. So my mom went to Irving to have went to Oak Cliff to have her children, then we were brought home to Irving. So my mother was born in Irving, my grandmother was born in Irving, and my great-grandparents came to West Dallas and Irving. So we've been here since the mid-1800s, and MacArthur High School in Irving is built on the back half of my grandparents' farm. When people are sending their kids to the Irving Public Schools, I'm a product of the Irving Public Schools. So I'm proud to be able to say that. There are other state reps and colleagues that do a great job of representing their district, but it's not their hometown. It's not where they're originally from. That doesn't take away from their ability to do a great job in representing their district. I just have a deep attachment and history that I'm proud of. So I had a cousin, my mother's cousin, actually, who was a school teacher, and she was my role model. And you know what they say about role models. So I wanted to be a teacher growing up. And so I went off to college. I majored in Spanish and history and got my teaching certificate. And so I've taught Spanish and history, mostly Spanish, every grade from kindergarten to sophomore level college, all the grades in between, private, public, etc. And I've taught Spanish for law enforcement officers. I've taught cultural awareness sensitivity training for teachers, military, and police. So I enjoyed that role of being able to teach. South Grand Prairie High School, that's where I did my student teaching. I mention it because I used to represent Grand Prairie. When I first ran, the district was Irving and Grand Prairie, and I saw it get that Grand Prairie connection there, but I really didn't teach a lot in Grand Prairie. It was my student teaching experience was in South Grand Prairie High School. And I bet I don't represent Grand Prairie anymore. In redistricting, I lost the Grand Prairie part, and my district is entirely the Irving ISD part of Irving. After teaching, I was already being active in the community in just like civic organizations, groups like the League of Women Voters, Hispanic Women's League, and LULAC. And so one of my mentors, Gilbert Garcia, who's no longer with us, said, "You're so active in the community, you ought to go for this fellowship that's Council of Governments has to encourage minorities and women to join the field of public administration." So because he suggested it, I put in for it. They choose a whole class. They don't just choose one person, so they choose a class. And so I got chosen for the class. I joke in the fellowship, it's the only time in my life I've been a fellow, but it was part internship, part scholarship. So they helped pay for my graduate school, and then I interned with the Fort Worth Economic Development Corporation that did small and minority business assistance. So the executive director there, Frank Moss, was another mentor of mine. And so he had encouraged me to apply for executive director of the Abilene Economic Development Corporation because they had patterned theirs after Fort Worth. I had no burning desire to live in Abilene. I was happy where I was. But because he was mentoring me and suggested it, I thought, well, I guess I should do that because I want to make sure that whatever opportunities that come along in the future, that he also mentions those to me. And so I went to interview. And for me, it was just like answering questions about what we did every day, which I guess for other people being interviewed, it was not. So they offered the job to me, made the newspaper. They had a headline that I wasn't so sure to brag about, but it said from intern to executive director. But that is what happened. I went from being an intern to being the executive director of the Abilene Economic Development Corporation. So I was out there for 4 years. And sometimes you have to go away to come back, to move up. And so when I came back, I continued to be executive directors in nonprofit groups that were pretty much just community development, economic development was what they had in common. So the Polytechnic Heights in Fort Worth, Poly Heights Main Street Corporation, that was a neighborhood revitalization program. The regional certification agency that certified minority and women-owned businesses. SER, Fort Worth, we did workforce development, helping people find jobs. And we also had an alternative ed program, so I was fitted for both of those. So I did that economic development, workforce development piece as an executive director when I was encouraged to go to law school. The only law school that was in the evening at that time was Texas Wesleyan. So after taking the test a couple of times, I finally went through with it as far as putting in for it and got accepted into Texas Wesleyan Law School, and I went in their evening program. So I was older, and I had to keep the day job. I had bankers, police lieutenants, landmen in my oil class, police lieutenant in my criminal justice class, a banker in it. But anyway, so I had very knowledgeable people as students in my class. And I thought, I can't imagine that the day school, who thinks, although that's night school, you know what they think, but night school has this kind of image anyway, that they thought we were lesser than. But I can't imagine that they had as rich a discussions as we had on the law with the kind of quality of colleagues or classmates that I had in my class. My first year went through fine. My mother was living with me because my dad had passed away. So she took care of my son while I was going to school. But then her health started to deteriorate, and I didn't feel like I could put that on her anymore. My son says, I see you doing all these things to get me ready to go back to school, but I don't see you doing anything to get you ready to go back to school. Don't you have to go register or something? And I said, well, I wasn't going to tell you about it. I've been thinking about it all summer, but I'm not going to be able to go back. And it really upset him. He said, I don't want you to give up your dream of being a lawyer. And I said, I don't want to either. I just can't think of any other way to do it that wouldn't be sacrificing him too much in the process. And he said, I know the way. I'll go with you.
Oh, my goodness. I can see the heart right here coming out of that.
So it took a lot of going back and forth because I said, I didn't even call the law school to tell them. I just figured I just don't show up the next semester. But I'll tell you what, I'll call and I'll tell them what you've offered and see what they say. It took about 4 calls back and forth, and I was pessimistic during all of it that they weren't going to let me. And they decided, okay, we decided you got to ask each professor individually, which meant I had to sign up for the class to know who to ask. And they must have talked to each other because they had the same conditions. They said you have to agree with whatever conditions they place on it. The conditions were everything that they thought a 6-year-old kid would do. He couldn't do, right? Can't be jumping up and down. He can't be talking. He can't be disturbing their students. He can't be going in and out. If gets complaints from the other students, he's out. Complaint from the professor, he's out. If it happens too often, I'm out. And so that's what we agreed to.
Yeah.
And my son did 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade by day and law school by night.
Oh, wow. That's unbelievable.
Isn't that cool? And they let him walk across the stage with me.
Oh, my goodness.
My classmates teased me. This is how it kind of came from my classmates. They said, you're not going to walk across the stage by yourself, are you? I said, what kind of question is that? People don't walk across in groups. Everybody walks across, you know what? And they said, well, you know, if you walk across by yourself, you're taking far more credit than you deserve because you didn't do this by yourself. So I think the idea emanated from my classmates who were skeptical about a kid in class when they first saw him, but he was so well behaved, he won them all over. So, but that's the kind of type bond that my son and I have.
That's beautiful. And it sounds to me like obviously you are just extremely heartful. But you're willing to, of course, make the phone calls, knock on the doors, and knock down some barriers in some ways, but then also being able to, obviously learn from a lot of different type of everyday Texans, around the state and very much seeing that you're bringing that back here to the Capitol right now.
So I'd love for him to go block walking with him because I introduce him first and I say, this is my angel Gabriel. Mm-hmm. And I'm his mother, Teresa. And I get a laugh out of them that way, and that's where their defenses kind of go down a little bit. I have somebody at their front door, and what are you here for? What are you selling or something?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I want to jump into some of those bills that, of course, your chief of staff, I'll give a shout out and thanks to Ryan Pope for reviewing these House bills with me. And I'm guessing some of these have come from your district and from folks bringing them to you. And so this is that Jeopardy round of your legislative priorities. I only see common sense solutions. So there's not going to be any, other than progressive and common sense solutions here that we're going over. The first
bill, I do consider myself a progressive.
I'm going to start off with just a few what I would call the progressive priorities, things that Progress Texas is definitely looking into. Reproductive rights, of course, we know that a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle appear likely to expand what we would say is an assault on Texas women or those who can become pregnant by further limiting access to abortion. Specifically, we're talking about life-saving medication, specifically used in miscarriage and contraceptives and anything around that, even like no-fault divorces coming into some of these conversations. Where do you see that fight, ahead as we're here in Austin right now?
Isn't it interesting how much men know about what women should do about their bodies and their health care? Too much of it is being written by people that don't really know what they're talking about. They need to let women talk about women's health care and reproductive health care. We've got young women who are postponing pregnancy, not because they don't want to be pregnant, not because they don't want to start a family, simply because they're afraid that something might happen and they won't be able to get the health care that they need. So how pro-life is that? I think it comes from a pro-life position. They're coming from a good place and that they want to be pro-life, but it's not coming with the kind of results that they're thinking they're going to get, that they're supporting having children, but it's having the opposite result because people are not having children out of fear that they won't get the health care. So I used to complain about insurance companies having too much of a role in our health care, whether we got the health care or not, because whether or not the insurance company approved. And then, the insurance people aren't doctors. And then we've got the additional problem here of politicians who think that they're doctors and want to decide what kind of medical care we get. And so we just need to get back to letting the doctors deciding the medical care and get the politicians and the insurance companies out of it. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. And that leads us perfectly into my second segue, which is healthcare. And, lately there's been a lot of what I would say strong disapproval, even bipartisan sometimes around the healthcare industry. Texas is dead last in healthcare coverage overall and has long neglected lower income folks by refusing to accept expanded federal funding. One thing I was specifically talking about was Texas has not expanded Medicaid, which could provide health insurance to millions of uninsured Texans. And I know y'all are talking about specific carve-outs. So could you kind of tell me a little bit how we can expand that? Of course, our listeners are ready to expand it tomorrow across the board, but there's specific carve-outs like pregnant women, mental health, patients and kids that we're trying to be able to bring on as quickly as we can.
Yes. Well, it gets to the big point, which is that we're one of the few states left that have not chosen to expand Medicaid. Sometimes we tend to think something is that way because it's supposed to be that way, and we don't realize that Texas is maybe one of the few. And as you mentioned, to your point, we're not only last, but we have the highest percentage of people who are not insured, and in raw numbers, we had the highest number of people that are uninsured of any state. And that's not something to brag about or be proud of, I don't think. I mean, we're very proud of being Texans, and we like to brag about ourselves a lot, but that's nothing to brag about in that. I've been supporting of the expansion of Medicaid ever since I first got elected. I'm concerned about how I have colleagues that aren't for it, and so how do we convince them that it's a good thing? It's our federal dollars that we sent to the federal government. We're just asking to get our own money back. And when we don't ask to get our own money back, what other states get it instead of us? So what I hear back from them and their reason is that they say that, well, it's a federal program. And if we join in on that, then there are federal strings attached. And if the federal government should decide not to participate anymore, then they're left to feel like the Texas would be left holding the bag, which I don't think necessarily would be the case. But to that point, I noticed that there's a lot of other red states that where their legislators have been able to reconcile their conservative principles and ideals with expansion of Medicaid. So what is it that those Republican legislators knew in their states that we need to convince our Republican legislators to understand here? Because it's been pretty much a vote that falls a lot along partisan lines. And so convincing our colleagues that supporting the expansion of Medicaid should not be a partisan issue. It's a healthcare issue, and so it affects all their constituents and so on as well. I think it would be a very important thing if we could just pass expansion of Medicaid. But to your point in your question, so we have some bills that do a smaller carve out of that, and the reason for that is if we can't get the whole thing, what is a version of that where we can expand Medicaid a little bit that maybe our colleagues would favor and that they would support, and that's why we have those particular carve-outs in mind, because we believe that our Republican colleagues would favor that.
And definitely one that you mentioned right off the bat was pregnant women. And so that definitely goes into a lot of these ideas that if we can reach out to folks that are across the aisle and of course, bring them in on understanding that especially those that are pregnant and most vulnerable, that if they don't have health insurance, they're not going to be able to, start productive lives, or especially those kids are not going to be able to be growing up in a healthy environment a lot of times. And we're not saying to of course label those mothers in any way. We just want to be able to give them what they deserve. I want to of course go through each one of these. That's House Bill 1409, which to me I'm seeing as the solitary confinement reform. Could you give me a little bit of a review over what that is and what y'all are trying to change?
I forgot how I got started in my interest in solitary confinement. But when I first, I think maybe it was somebody else's bill or something, and when I started looking into it, I was shocked at how much Texas uses it. Other states don't use it at all. There are only a handful of states that use it, and we use it, I'll say the worst, the most. I thought, I'm going to say this in a way kind of like it's being disparaging of me or joking about me. I thought of solitary confinement kind of like time out. You did something bad. Go over there, sit, think about what you did.
Stare at the wall.
Yes, kind of like mom put you in the corner or something, okay. and then they were let out after a week or so. But it's not that way. There are people that are not in there just a week or two. They're in there for months. There are people that have been there for years, and these are not people that are condemned to death. Mm-hmm. They're going to be returned to the general population, to society. And where's their people spills going to come from? How are they having any opportunity toward rehabilitation, if that's our goal, especially if we're going to release people, our goal should be rehabilitation, return into society. Studies that have been done on it say that more than a week, you already have mental health damage, and 2 weeks should be the most. So that's what our bill proposes. It doesn't necessarily say to end the practice of, well, using the term solitary confinement, they call it also administrative segregation, restricted, different terms for it, but just the mental health damage that it does. We had a senator, I don't know if you remember his name, State Senator Carlos Oresti. He had corruption charges. I don't remember the details, and I guess it's not that important, but he got sentenced to prison. And so some of my colleagues, when we talk about this, they say, well, they're in there because they did something bad. So they don't have much sympathy for them. They must be bad people. That's why they're in solitary. When he was checking in, they assigned him to solitary. He hadn't even been there a day yet. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he was assigned to solitary. And you can guess the reason why, right? Because of his status, they felt like it's to protect him. He said that his experience was, I'd rather take my risks with the general population than have to stay in solitary confinement. That's how bad he felt that it was. So I don't know about taking my risk with the general population. Maybe solitary confinement.
Maybe it would be better. Yeah. Yeah, and this gives a little bit more of a what I would say some guidelines. Like you said, we're wanting to bring, we want to be able to help these folks so that they can be productive members of society.
And not surprisingly, or it shouldn't be surprised that there are people in our prisons and our county jails that have mental health issues, and putting them in solitary confinement doesn't do anything to improve their mental health issues. So anyway, so that we've talked about that to the corrections committees before, and so they have heard it. All bills, talking about the process, all bills get assigned to a committee, but not all bills get heard.
What is that kind of process? You know, we love seeing, you know, the bill, how it becomes a law. There's that cute video. What's kind of the process here in Texas with that?
So we submit our ideas for bills. Ledge Council drafts it up in the beautiful, all the legalese and everything that needs to go with it. It gets filed. And like I said, all bills that get filed get a number. And all bills that get filed get assigned to a committee. So all bills are assigned to a committee, but it's the chair of the committee, and with input from vice chair, but because it's a Democrat-Republican chair, Democratic vice chair combination, that they decide what bills they're going to hear. So the first obstacle we have to overcome as legislators with our bills that we're promoting is to get them a hearing. And it's harder than it sounds.
The last thing I want to ask you, again, thank you for joining the Progress Texas podcast today. I want to ask you, can you give us a little bit of words of encouragement, of course, when we're in this legislative session, but just going forward, you know?
Well, there was an expression, I guess, was that Star Wars or Star Trek? When am I thinking of? Where they say always
both.
Oh, you do? That resistance is futile? Well, no, it's not. So when there are things that are there, you hear more about the bad stuff, right? That gets more publicity than the good bills. Aren't as exciting, I guess, to hear about as the ones that we think of as really bad. And you hear about all these bad bills, and just know that those bills may not get anywhere, because remember, the first step is they got to get hearing in committee. They get a hearing in committee. That's when our numbers are the closest. Speaking partisan here, as Democrats, that's when our numbers are the closest. We're maybe only one vote difference. We may be a 5-4 committee. So that's when we as committee members can ask the good questions and question them. We have an opportunity to get the bill changed, maybe get the author of the bill to consider some concern we have and make an amendment to their bill, and that we won't vote it out of committee until, if you will amend it to that, to include that concern that we had that we think would make the bill better, then we can vote for it to be out of committee. And of course, they're motivated to make that change. And so we have an opportunity right there at the committee level, when our votes, like I said, between the two parties are very close, to make a difference in whether a bill even gets out of committee. Maybe not. If it's a bad bill, we might be able to keep it from getting out of committee. And if it gets out of committee, that maybe we may make a bad bill a little less bad, because we may be able to get them to make some changes in their bill. Then when it gets to the House floor, there's the time to vote. And our numbers are not as close there, right? Because I think it's 84 Republicans, 66 Democrats. And so our numbers are not that close. We have to have a few Republicans come over and join us, but that's not unknown or unheard of. That's what defeated vouchers, and all the special sessions we had was that rural Republicans joined with the Democrats in opposing vouchers, because vouchers are not good in the rural areas either. They don't have as many choices of other schools they can send their kids to, for one thing. Schools are their major employer. Schools are what the social life of the families revolve around. Is what their kids are doing at school, going to their football games or going to their school activities and so on. So it's a big part of their all those small towns' identity. And so the rural Republicans understood that and joined with us. Of course, that's changed with Abbott's purge on anyone that didn't support him. But we have 31 new members of the House this session. But we still think it's possible that Abbott's proclaiming victory, that he has the numbers, and I'm here to tell you that we're not so sure that he does. Mm-hmm. So take heart in that. It's not over till it's over. There are some people that may be saying officially that they're not going to vote for it, but unofficially they have a lot of concerns about it. And so the bill as it's currently presented probably will not be the bill that gets passed. That if it gets passed, it'll have changes to it, changes that come through the Pub Ed Committee. So just use vouchers as an example of one of the things that we're working on and how we can work together, that there still are some issues that Republicans and Democrats can work on together. And then our 66 number, while it's not a majority, does keep them from anything that requires a 2/3 vote. We can use that as leverage to say, you want our 2/3 vote, we need you to do.
To help us out here.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing is there's still maybe a little bit of horse trading, but also that's hopeful of knowing that we can find some friends sometimes in the places that we didn't always know that they were.
Yes. So we still have leverage.
We still have leverage and a strong House here. Of course, I'm joined again by Representative Terry Meza from Irving, Texas. And thank you again for joining us. And listeners here at Progress Texas, you know us. We're in the business of countering the conservative disinformation machine. But while that machine is funded by oil billionaires, tech puppet masters, religious right-wing groups, and more, we rely on mostly everyday Texans who value our hard work and share our belief that a Texas that works for everybody is a Texas we want to live in. We don't do subscriptions or paywalls because we believe the message of progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and of course, act upon. So if you become a regular listener, we could use your support, and no amount is too small. Thanks to Sherry Grusendorf and Bart Ewald for joining the team as monthly contributors. You can join them too. Go to progresstexas.org/donate. Thank you for listening.
The Progress Texas Happy Hour is a production of Progress Texas, a rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. Find us online at progresstexas.org and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The podcast is produced by me, Chris Mosier, and our featured music is by Walker Lukens. Please be sure and subscribe to the Progress Texas Happy Hour on the podcast platform of your choice. Take a moment to leave us a review if you've enjoyed the show, and be sure and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State. We'll see you again next week.